Quick question. If you live in a tiny country, like a really tiny one, the one where you have really to zoom in Google Maps, can you still be an indie developer? You know, I'm asking because I'm currently in Liechtenstein.
Yes, that Liechtenstein. And at some point I stopped and thought, wait a second. Are there indie devs here at all, or am I the only one who fought coding bugs at night? So, let's talk about indie developers in small countries and micro countries, using some data where possible, while I try to show you some videos of Liechtenstein.
But you know, size really doesn't matter, at least in game development.
This whole topic started with a very simple question. Liechtenstein is one of the smallest countries in the world, with around 40,000 people. No big cities, no massive tech hubs, at least not in game development, and definitely no game dev conferences happening every weekend. I started wondering if countries this small actually have indie developers, or if games are only made in big places like the US, Japan, or Germany. Once you start asking that question, you immediately want to expand it. What about other micro countries? What about places with fewer people than a football stadium? Do they also have people making games? And if they do, how many are there? And how visible are they to the rest of the world? This is not just curiosity. For indie developers, especially beginners, location can feel like a massive limitation. You might think that you're too far away, or that your country is too small for a real scene. I wanted to dig into that feeling and see what the reality actually looks like. But let's first be clear with what I mean by indie developer. When I say indie developer, I am not talking only about people with a registered studio, an office, and a Steam hit. I'm also talking about solo developers, hobbyists, small teams, and people making games in their bedroom. This includes people publishing on itch.io, for example, joining game jams, or slowly building a commercial project over several years while working a day job. Most indie developers do not show up in official government statistics. They do not always register companies, they do not always publish finished games, and sometimes they work quietly for a very long time before anyone sees their work. This is important because when we look at small countries, the lack of data does not mean a lack of developers. It just means they are playing the game on stealth mode. Now, let's zoom out for a second. According to industry research from Qubit Labs and other market analysts, there are over 11 million people worldwide involved in game development as 2024 and 2025. This includes professionals, students, and hobbyists. If you look at even broader developer data from /data, they suggest the total number of software developers probably is actually heading toward 47 million. Now, think about that number. If millions of people are making games around the world, statistically, they cannot all be concentrated in just 10 big countries, right? Tools like Unity, Unreal Engine, Godot, and GameMaker are accessible almost everywhere. You do not need a physical studio or a fancy office in San Francisco. You just need a computer and internet access. This suggests that indie game development is not geographically locked. It is completely distributed across the globe. Here's where things get a bit tricky. When you search for data about game developers by country, you mostly find information about large or medium-sized countries. This is because most reports focus on economic impact, industry size, or export value. Micro countries simply do not move the needle enough to be included in a big financial spreadsheet, at least not in the gaming industry.
Liechtenstein, Monaco, San Marino. Usually these tiny countries are unseen in global data reports. Also Vatican City, but I'm pretty sure that in Vatican City there are no game developers.
This is not because nothing is happening there. It is because whatever happens is too small to measure at a massive industry level. If a single person in Liechtenstein makes a game that sells a few thousand copies, it is a huge personal success, of course, but it does not change the national GDP. So it gets ignored in statistics. When you do not see data, it does not mean zero developers. It just means untracked developers. To understand how this scales, let's first look at some small countries that are still large enough to have visible data. Estonia is a great example. It has about 1.3 million people, which is small by global standards. Yet Estonia has a surprisingly active scene. According to Game Dev Estonia, there are around 70 to 80 game-related companies and teams there. Iceland is another interesting case. With around 370,000 people, they have a revenue average of around $84 million in the industry. Obviously, mostly driven by giants like CCP Games, but they also have a thriving indie and game jam community. These countries show a pattern. Once you have a few 100,000 people, a visible industry starts to form. But what about the true micro countries like Liechtenstein, Monaco, San Marino, Andorra, and even Vatican City? We are talking about populations ranging from a few hundred people to around 80,000. There's almost no public data about indie developers here, and that is expected. Liechtenstein, for example, does not have a publicly documented game industry or official studios listed in big global database. But if we look at the global game jam data for 2025, they had over 35,000 participants across 97 countries. Even if a country does not have a formal site, people often participate online. So, statistically, it would be very strange if there were zero people in Liechtenstein interested in game development, especially since the country is actually a high-tech hub. Again, not in game development, but in other stuff. Recent reports show Liechtenstein invests over 8% of its GDP into research and development, with a growing focus on blockchain and cybersecurity. So, if people are coding complex financial systems here, you can bet someone is also coding a platformer in their spare time. One of the biggest misconceptions is that you need a local game dev scene to be an indie developer. That used to be more true years ago, when you needed physical kits and local publishers. Today, it matters much less. Engines like Unity and Godot are free to start. Version control like Git works anywhere with a signal. Asset stores exist for everything you cannot draw or compose yourself. Online communities have replaced the local pub. Discord servers have replaced the office water cooler. As an indie developer, your real community is often online, not local. This is why someone in Liechtenstein can collaborate with an artist in Brazil, a programmer in Canada, and a musician in Japan without ever meeting in person. So, from a workflow point of view, your physical location is just a background for your desk. And there's also a positive side. There are fewer distractions, a much calmer environment, and a great work-life balance if you manage it right. Many indie developers actually choose to move to quieter, smaller places specifically to focus on their craft. Being from a small or unusual country can even become part of your brand. It makes your story more interesting and helps you stand out in a crowded market. Now, another question. Does actually living in a micro country limit your chances of success as an indie developer? The honest answer is no, not in any meaningful way. Success in the indie world depends far more on game quality, marketing, timing, and persistence. Many of the most successful indie games were made by solo developers or tiny teams spread across different countries. The only real limitation might be access to specific government grants for games, which many micro countries probably do not have yet. But that does not stop a project from being self-funded or finding success on Kickstarter. Anyway, I'll probably make another video about the advantages of living in a big city for game developers. Okay, if you're watching this and you live in a small country or a micro country and you are thinking about making games, listen closely. Your location is not a blocker. It might feel lonely sometimes, and you might have to work harder to find your community online. But it does not limit your potential. The tools are global, the audience is global, and the market is global. You do not need permission from your country to be an indie developer. Well, maybe in some countries, not sure. You just need a laptop and keep going until you have something to show. So, if you're a developer from a small country or you're just starting your journey, I would genuinely love to hear your story. Let me know what you think in the comments and tell me where you're developing from right now.
Thanks for watching.